Today, in Audiobooks for Me, we are going to listen to The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. This book is divided in 3 videos. This is Part 1. We hope you enjoy it. The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. London. John Murray, Albemarle Street, W. First published 1927. Preface. I fear that Mr. Sherlock Holmes may become like one of those popular tenors who, having outlived their time, are still tempted to make repeated farewell bows to their indulgent audiences. This must cease, and he must go the way of all flesh, material, or imaginary. One likes to think that there is some fantastic limbo for the children of imagination, some strange, impossible place where the bows of Fielding may still make love to the bells of Richardson, where Scott's heroes still may strut, Dickens's delightful cockneys still raise a laugh, and Thackeray's worldlings continue to carry on their reprehensible careers. Perhaps in some humble corner of such a Valhalla, Sherlock and his Watson may for a time find a place, while some more astute sleuth with some even less astute comrade may fill the stage which they have vacated. His career has been a long one, though it is possible to exaggerate it. Decrepit gentlemen who approach me and declare that his adventures formed the reading of their boyhood do not meet the response from me which they seem to expect. One is not anxious to have one's personal dates handled so unkindly. As a matter of cold fact, Holmes made his debut in A Study in Scarlet and in The Sign of 4, 2 small booklets which appeared between 1887 and 1889. It was in 1891 that A Scandal in Bohemia, the first of the long series of short stories, appeared in the Strand magazine. The public seemed appreciative and desirous of more, so that from that date, 36 years ago, they have been produced in a broken series which now contains no fewer than 56 stories, republished in The Adventures, The Memoirs, The Return, and His Last Bow, and there remain these 12 published during the last few years, which are here produced under the title of The Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. He began his adventures in the very heart of the later Victorian era, carried it through the all-too-short reign of Edward, and has managed to hold his own little niche even in these feverish days. Thus it would be true to say that those who first read of him as young men have lived to see their own grown-up children following the same adventures in the same magazine. It is a striking example of the patience and loyalty of the British public. I had fully determined at the conclusion of the memoirs to bring Holmes to an end, as I felt that my literary energies should not be directed too much into one channel. That pale, clear-cut face and loose-limbed figure were taking up an undue share of my imagination. I did the deed, but fortunately no coroner had pronounced upon the remains, and so after a long interval it was not difficult for me to respond to the flattering demand and to explain my rash act away. I have never regretted it, for I have not in actual practice found that these lighter sketches have prevented me from exploring and finding my limitations in such varied branches of literature as history, poetry, historical novels, psychic research, and the drama. Had Holmes never existed, I could not have done more, though he may perhaps have stood a little in the way of the recognition of my more serious literary work, and so, reader, farewell to Sherlock Holmes. I thank you for your past constancy, and can but hope that some return has been made in the shape of that distraction from the worries of life and stimulating change of thought which can only be found in the fairy kingdom of romance. Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. The Adventure of the Illustrious Client. "It can't hurt now," was Mr. Sherlock Holmes's comment when, for the 10th time in as many years, I asked his leave to reveal the following narrative. So it was that at last I obtained permission to put on record what was, in some ways, the supreme moment of my friend's career. Both Holmes and I had a weakness for the Turkish bath. It was over a smoke in the pleasant lassitude of the drying room that I have found him less reticent and more human than anywhere else. On the upper floor of the Northumberland Avenue establishment, there is an isolated corner where two couches lie side by side, and it was on these that we lay upon September 3rd, 1902, the day when my narrative begins. I had asked him whether anything was stirring, and for answer he had shot his long, thin, nervous arm out of the sheets which enveloped him, and had drawn an envelope from the inside pocket of the coat which hung beside him. "It may be some fussy, self-important fool. It may be a matter of life or death," said he, as he handed me the note. "I know no more than this message tells me." It was from the Carlton Club, and dated the evening before. This is what I read. "Sir James Damery presents his compliments to Mr. Sherlock Holmes and will call upon him at 4:30 tomorrow. Sir James begs to say that the matter upon which he desires to consult Mr. Holmes is very delicate and also very important. He trusts, therefore, that Mr. Holmes will make every effort to grant this interview, and that he will confirm it over the telephone to the Carlton Club." "I need not say that I have confirmed it, Watson," said Holmes, as I returned the paper. "Do you know anything of this man Damery?" "Only that his name is a household word in society." "Well, I can tell you a little more than that. He has rather a reputation for arranging delicate matters which are to be kept out of the papers. You may remember his negotiations with Sir George Lewis over the Hammerford will case. He is a man of the world with a natural turn for diplomacy. I am bound, therefore, to hope that it is not a false scent, and that he has some real need for our assistance." "Our?" "Well, if you will be so good, Watson." "I shall be honoured." "Then you have the hour, 4:30. Until then we can put the matter out of our heads." I was living in my own rooms in Queen Anne Street at the time, but I was round at Baker Street before the time named. Sharp to the half-hour, Colonel Sir James Damery was announced. It is hardly necessary to describe him, for many will remember that large, bluff, honest personality, that broad, clean-shaven face, above all, that pleasant, mellow voice. Frankness shone from his grey Irish eyes, and good humour played round his mobile, smiling lips. His lucent top hat, his dark frock-coat indeed, every detail, from the pearl pin in the black satin cravat to the lavender spats over the varnished shoes, spoke of the meticulous care in dress for which he was famous. The big, masterful aristocrat dominated the little room. "Of course, I was prepared to find Dr. Watson," he remarked, with a courteous bow. "His collaboration may be very necessary, for we are dealing on this occasion, Mr. Holmes, with a man to whom violence is familiar and who will literally stick at nothing. I should say that there is no more dangerous man in Europe." "I have had several opponents to whom that flattering term has been applied," said Holmes with a smile. "Don't you smoke? Then you will excuse me if I light my pipe. If your man is more dangerous than the late Professor Moriarty, or than the living Colonel Sebastian Moran, then he is indeed worth meeting. May I ask his name?" "Have you ever heard of Baron Gruner?" "You mean the Austrian murderer?" Colonel Damery threw up his kid-gloved hands with a laugh. "There is no getting past you, Mr. Holmes." "Wonderful. So you have already sized him up as a murderer?" "It is my business to follow the details of continental crime. Who could possibly have read what happened at Prague and have any doubts as to the man's guilt? It was a purely technical legal point, and the suspicious death of a witness that saved him. I am as sure that he killed his wife when the so-called accident happened in the Splugen Pass as if I had seen him do it. I knew also that he had come to England and had a presentiment that sooner or later he would find me some work to do. Well, What has Baron Gruner been up to? I presume it is not this old tragedy which has come up again. No, it is more serious than that. To revenge crime is important, but to prevent it is more so. It is a terrible thing, Mr. Holmes, to see a dreadful event, an atrocious situation preparing itself before your eyes, to clearly understand whither it will lead, and yet to be utterly unable to avert it. Can a human being be placed in a more trying position? Perhaps not. Then you will sympathize with the client in whose interests I am acting. I did not understand that you were merely an intermediary. Who is the principal? Mr. Holmes, I must beg you not to press that question. It is important that I should be able to assure him that his honored name has been in no way dragged into the matter. His motives are, to the last degree, honorable and chivalrous, but he prefers to remain unknown. I need not say that your fees will be assured and that you will be given a perfectly free hand. Surely the actual name of your client is immaterial? I am sorry, said Holmes. I am accustomed to have mystery at one end of my cases, but to have it at both ends is too confusing. I fear, Sir James, that I must decline to act. Our visitor was greatly disturbed. His large, sensitive face was darkened with emotion and disappointment. You hardly realize the effect of your own action, Mr. Holmes, said he. You place me in a most serious dilemma, for I am perfectly certain that you would be proud to take over the case if I could give you the facts, and yet a promise forbids me from revealing them all. May I, at least, lay all that I can before you? By all means, so long as it is understood that I commit myself to nothing. That is understood. In the first place, you have no doubt heard of General de Merville? De Merville of Khyber fame? Yes, I have heard of him. He has a daughter, Violet de Merville, young, rich, beautiful, accomplished, a wonder woman in every way. It is this daughter, this lovely, innocent girl, whom we are endeavoring to save from the clutches of a fiend. Baron Gruner has some hold over her, then? The strongest of all holds where a woman is concerned. The hold of love. The fellow is, as you may have heard, extraordinarily handsome, with a most fascinating manner, a gentle voice, and that air of romance and mystery which means so much to a woman. He is said to have the whole sex at his mercy, and to have made ample use of the fact. But how came such a man to meet a lady of the standing of Miss Violet de Merville? It was on a Mediterranean yachting voyage. The company, though select, paid their own passages. No doubt, the promoters hardly realized the Baron's true character until it was too late. The villain attached himself to the lady, and with such effect that he has completely and absolutely won her heart. To say that she loves him hardly expresses it. She dotes upon him. She is obsessed by him. Outside of him, there is nothing on earth. She will not hear one word against him. Everything has been done to cure her of her madness, but in vain. To sum up, she proposes to marry him next month. As she is of age and has a will of iron, it is hard to know how to prevent her. Does she know about the Austrian episode? The cunning devil has told her every unsavory public scandal of his past life, but always in such a way as to make himself out to be an innocent martyr. She absolutely accepts his version and will listen to no other. Dear me, but surely you have inadvertently let out the name of your client. It is no doubt General de Merville. Our visitor fidgeted in his chair. I could deceive you by saying so, Mr. Holmes, but it would not be true. De Merville is a broken man. The strong soldier has been utterly demoralized by this incident. He has lost the nerve which never failed him on the battlefield, and has become a weak, doddering old man, utterly incapable of contending with a brilliant, forceful rascal like this Austrian. My client, however, is an old friend, one who has known the general intimately for many years and taken a paternal interest in this young girl since she wore short frocks. He cannot see this tragedy consummated without some attempt to stop it. There is nothing in which Scotland Yard can act. It was his own suggestion that you should be called in, but it was, as I have said, on the express stipulation that he should not be personally involved in the matter. I have no doubt, Mr. Holmes, with your great powers, you could easily trace my client back through me, but I must ask you, as a point of honor, to refrain from doing so, and not to break in upon his incognito." Holmes gave a whimsical smile. "I think I may safely promise that," said he. "I may add that your problem interests me, and that I shall be prepared to look into it. How shall I keep in touch with you?" "The Carlton Club will find me. But, in case of emergency, there is a private telephone call, XX 31. Holmes noted it down and sat, still smiling, with the open memorandum book upon his knee. "The Baron's present address, please?" "Vernon Lodge, near Kingston. It is a large house. He has been fortunate in some rather shady speculations, and is a rich man, which naturally makes him a more dangerous antagonist." "Is he at home at present?" "Yes." "Apart from what you have told me, can you give me any further information about the man?" "He has expensive tastes. He is a horse fancier. For a short time he played polo at Hurlingham, but then this Prague affair got noised about, and he had to leave. He collects books and pictures. He is a man with a considerable artistic side to his nature. He is, I believe, a recognized authority upon Chinese pottery, and has written a book upon the subject." "A complex mind," said Holmes. "All great criminals have that. My old friend Charlie Peace was a violin virtuoso. Wainwright was no mean artist. I could quote many more. Well, Sir James, you will inform your client that I am turning my mind upon Baron Gruner. I can say no more. I have some sources of information of my own, and dare say we may find some means of opening matter up." When our visitor had left us, Holmes sat so long in deep thought that it seemed to me that he had forgotten my presence. At last, however, he came briskly back to earth. "Well, Watson, any views?" he asked. "I should think you had better see the young lady herself." "My dear Watson, if her poor old broken father cannot move her, how shall I, a stranger, prevail? And yet there is something in the suggestion if all else fails. But I think we must begin from a different angle. I rather fancy that Shinwell Johnson might be a help. I have not had occasion to mention Shinwell Johnson in these memoirs because I have seldom drawn my cases from the latter phases of my friend's career. During the first years of the century, he became a valuable assistant. Johnson, I grieve to say, made his name first as a very dangerous villain and served 2 terms at Parkhurst. Finally, he repented and allied himself to Holmes, acting as his agent in the huge criminal underworld of London and obtaining information which often proved to be of vital importance. Had Johnson been a narc of the police, he would soon have been exposed, but as he dealt with cases which never came directly into the courts, his activities were never realized by his companions. With the glamour of his 2 convictions upon him, he had the entree of every nightclub, doss-house, and gambling den in the town, and his quick observation and active brain made him an ideal agent for gaining information. It was to him that Sherlock Holmes now proposed to turn. It was not possible for me to follow the immediate steps taken by my friend, for I had some pressing professional business of my own, but I met him by appointment that evening at Simpson's, where, sitting at a small table in the front window and looking down at the rushing stream of life in the Strand, he told me something of what had passed. "Johnson is on the prowl," said he. "He may pick up some garbage in the darker recesses of the underworld, for it is down there, amid the black roots of crime, that we must hunt for this man's secrets." "But if the lady will not accept what is already known, why should any fresh discovery of yours turn her from her purpose?" "Who knows, Watson? Woman's heart and mind are insoluble puzzles to the male." Murder might be condoned or explained, and yet some smaller offence might rankle. Baron Gruner remarked to me, "He remarked to you. Oh, to be sure, I had not told you of my plans. Well, Watson, I love to come to close grips with my man. I like to meet him eye to eye and read for myself the stuff that he is made of. When I had given Johnson his instructions, I took a cab out to Kingston and found the Baron in a most affable mood." "Did he recognize you?" "There was no difficulty about that, for I simply sent in my card. He is an excellent antagonist, cool as ice, silky-voiced and soothing as one of your fashionable consultants, and poisonous as a cobra. He has breed in him a real aristocrat of crime, with a superficial suggestion of afternoon tea and all the cruelty of the grave behind it. Yes, I am glad to have had my attention called to Baron Adalbert Gruner." "You say he was affable?" "A purring cat who thinks he sees prospective mice. Some people's affability is more deadly than the violence of coarser souls. His greeting was characteristic. "I rather thought I should see you sooner or later, Mr. Holmes," said he. "You have been engaged, no doubt, by General de Merville to endeavour to stop my marriage with his daughter Violet. That is so, is it not?" I acquiesced. "My dear man," said he, "you will only ruin your own well-deserved reputation. It is not a case in which you can possibly succeed. You will have barren work, to say nothing of incurring some danger. Let me very strongly advise you to draw off at once." "It is curious," I answered, "but that was the very advice which I had intended to give you. I have a respect for your brains, Baron, and the little which I have seen of your personality has not lessened it. Let me put it to you as man to man. No one wants to rake up your past and make you unduly uncomfortable. It is over, and you are now in smooth waters. But if you persist in this marriage, you will raise up a swarm of powerful enemies who will never leave you alone until they have made England too hot to hold you. Is the game worth it? Surely you would be wiser if you left the lady alone. It would not be pleasant for you if these facts of your past were brought to her notice. The Baron has little wax tips of hair under his nose like the short antennae of an insect. These quivered with amusement as he listened, and he finally broke into a gentle chuckle. "Excuse my amusement, Mr. Holmes," said he, "but it is really funny to see you trying to play a hand with no cards in it. I don't think anyone could do it better, but it is rather pathetic all the same. Not a colour card there, Mr. Holmes, nothing but the smallest of the small." "So you think. So I know. Let me make the thing clear to you, for my own hand is so strong that I can afford to show it. I have been fortunate enough to win the entire affection of this lady. This was given to me in spite of the fact that I told her very clearly of all the unhappy incidents in my past life. I also told her that certain wicked and designing persons, I hope you recognize yourself, would come to her and tell her these things, and I warned her how to treat them. You have heard of post-hypnotic suggestion, Mr. Holmes? Well, you will see how it works, for a man of personality can use hypnotism without any vulgar passes or tomfoolery. So she is ready for you, and I have no doubt would give you an appointment, for she is quite amenable to her father's will, save only in the one little matter." Well, Watson, there seemed to be no more to say, so I took my leave with as much cold dignity as I could summon. But as I had my hand on the door-handle, he stopped me. "By the way, Mr. Holmes," said he, "did you know Lebrun, the French agent?" "Yes," said I. "Do you know what befell him?" "I heard that he was beaten by some Apaches in the Montmartre district and crippled for life." "Quite true, Mr. Holmes. By a curious coincidence, he had been inquiring into my affairs only a week before. Don't do it, Mr. Holmes. It's not a lucky thing to do. Several have found that out. My last word to you is, go your own way and let me go mine. Goodbye." "So there you are, Watson. You are up to date now." "The fellow seems dangerous. Mighty dangerous. I disregard the blusterer, but this is the sort of man who says rather less than he means." Must you interfere? Does it really matter if he marries the girl? Considering that he undoubtedly murdered his last wife, I should say it mattered very much. Besides the client, well, we need not discuss that. When you have finished your coffee, you had best come home with me, for the blithe Shinwell will be there with his report. We found him sure enough, a huge, coarse, red-faced, scorbutic man with a pair of vivid black eyes, which were the only external sign of the very cunning mind within. It seems that he had dived down into what was peculiarly his kingdom, and beside him on the settee was a brand which he had brought up in the shape of a slim, flame-like young woman with a pale, intense face, youthful, and yet so worn with sin and sorrow that one read the terrible years which had left their leprous mark upon her. "This is Miss Kitty Winter," said Shinwell Johnson, waving his fat hand as an introduction. "What she don't know, well there, she'll speak for herself. Put my hand right on her, Mr. Holmes, within an hour of your message." "I'm easy to find," said the young woman. "Hell, London gets me every time. Same address for Porky Shinwell. We're old mates, Porky, you and I, but by gripes, there is another who ought to be down in a lower hell than we, if there was any justice in the world. That is the man you are after, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled. "I gather we have your good wishes, Miss Winter." "If I can help to put him where he belongs, I'm yours to the rattle," said our visitor with fierce energy. There was an intensity of hatred in her white, set face, and her blazing eyes, such as woman, seldom and man, never can attain. "You needn't go into my past, Mr. Holmes, that's neither here nor there. But what I am Adelbert Gruner made me, if I could pull him down." She clutched frantically with her hands into the air. "Oh, if I could only pull him into the pit, where he has pushed so many. You know how the matter stands? Porky Shinwell has been telling me. He's after some other poor fool and wants to marry her this time. You want to stop it. Well, you surely know enough about this devil to prevent any decent girl in her senses wanting to be in the same parish with him." "She is not in her senses. She is madly in love. She has been told all about him. She cares nothing." "Told about the murder?" "Yes. My lord, she must have a nerve. She puts them all down as slanders. Couldn't you lay proofs before her silly eyes?" "Well, can you help us do so? Ain't I a proof myself? If I stood before her and told her how he used me, would you do this?" "Would I? Would I not?" "Well, it might be worth trying. But he has told her most of his sins and had pardon from her, and I understand she will not reopen the question." "I'll lay he didn't tell her all," said Miss Winter. "I caught a glimpse of 1 or 2 murders besides the one that made such a fuss. He would speak of someone in his velvet way, and then look at me with a steady eye and say, 'He died within a month.' It wasn't hot air either, but I took little notice. You see, I loved him myself at that time. Whatever he did went with me, same as with this poor fool. There was just one thing that shook me. Yes, by gripes. If it had not been for his poisonous lying tongue that explains and soothes, I'd have left him that very night. It's a book he has, a brown leather book, with a lock, and his arms in gold on the outside. I think he was a bit drunk that night, or he would not have shown it to me." "What was it, then?" "I tell you, Mr. Holmes, this man collects women and takes a pride in his collection, as some men collect moths or butterflies. He had it all in that book. Snapshot photographs, names, details, everything about them. It was a beastly book, a book no man, even if he had come from the gutter, could have put together. But it was Adelbert Gruner's book all the same. Souls I have ruined. He could have put that on the outside if he had been so minded. However, that's neither here nor there, for the book would not serve you, and if it would, you can't get it." "Where is it?" "How can I tell you where it is now? It's more than a year since I left him. I know where he kept it then. He's a precise tidy cat of a man in many of his ways, so maybe it is still in the pigeonhole of the old bureau in the inner study. Do you know his house?" "I've been in the study," said Holmes. "Have you, though? You haven't been slow on the job, if you only started this morning. Maybe dear Adelbert has met his match this time. The outer study is the one with the Chinese crockery in it, big glass cupboard between the windows. Then behind his desk is the door that leads to the inner study, a small room where he keeps papers and things." "Is he not afraid of burglars?" "Adelbert is no coward. His worst enemy couldn't say that of him. He can look after himself. There's a burglar alarm at night. Besides, what is there for a burglar unless they got away with all this fancy crockery?" "No good," said Shinwell Johnson, with the decided voice of the expert. "No fence wants stuff of that sort that you can neither melt nor sell." "Quite so," said Holmes. "Well, now, Miss Winter, if you would call here tomorrow evening at 5, I would consider in the meanwhile whether your suggestion of seeing this lady personally may not be arranged. I am exceedingly obliged to you for your cooperation. I need not say that my clients will consider liberally—" "None of that, Mr. Holmes," cried the young woman. "I am not out for money. Let me see this man in the mud, and I've got all I worked for, in the mud with my foot on his cursed face. That's my price. I'm with you tomorrow or any other day, so long as you are on his track. Porky here can tell you always where to find me." I did not see Holmes again until the following evening, when we dined once more at our Strand restaurant. He shrugged his shoulders when I asked him what luck he had had in his interview. Then he told the story, which I would repeat in this way. His hard, dry statement needs some little editing to soften it into the terms of real life. "There was no difficulty at all about the appointment," said Holmes, "for the girl glories in showing abject filial obedience in all secondary things in an attempt to atone for her flagrant breach of it in her engagement." The General phoned that all was ready, and the fiery Miss W. turned up according to schedule, so that at 5:30 a cab deposited us outside 104 Berkeley Square, where the old soldier resides, one of those awful grey London castles which would make a church seem frivolous. A footman showed us into a great yellow-curtained drawing-room, and there was the lady awaiting us, demure, pale, self-contained, as inflexible and remote as a snow image on a mountain. "I don't quite know how to make her clear to you, Watson. Perhaps you may meet her before we are through, and you can use your own gift of words. She is beautiful, but with the ethereal, otherworld beauty of some fanatic whose thoughts are set on high. I have seen such faces in the pictures of the old masters of the Middle Ages. How a beast-man could have laid his vile paws upon such a being of the beyond, I cannot imagine. You may have noticed how extremes call to each other, the spiritual to the animal, the cave-man to the angel. You never saw a worse case than this. She knew what we had come for, of course. That villain had lost no time in poisoning her mind against us. Miss Winter's advent rather amazed her, I think, but she waved us into our respective chairs like a reverend abbess receiving two rather leprous mendicants. If your head is inclined to swell, my dear Watson, take a course of Miss Violet de Merville. "Well, sir," said she, in a voice like the wind from an iceberg, "your name is familiar to me. You have called, as I understand, to malign my fiancé, Baron Gruner. It is only by my father's request that I see you at all, and I warn you in advance that anything you can say could not possibly have the slightest effect upon my mind." I was sorry for her, Watson. I thought of her for the moment as I would have thought of a daughter of my own. I am not often eloquent. I use my head, not my heart, but I really did plead with her with all the warmth of words that I could find in my nature. I pictured to her the awful position of the woman who only wakes to a man's character after she is his wife, a woman who has to submit to be caressed by bloody hands and lecherous lips. I spared her nothing. The shame, the fear, the agony, the hopelessness of it all. All my hot words could not bring one tinge of colour to those ivory cheeks or one gleam of emotion to those abstracted eyes. I thought of what the rascal had said about a post-hypnotic influence. One could really believe that she was living above the earth in some ecstatic dream. Yet there was nothing indefinite in her replies. "I have listened to you with patience, Mr. Holmes," said she. "The effect upon my mind is exactly as predicted. I am aware that that my fiancé, has had a stormy life in which he has incurred bitter hatreds and most unjust aspersions. You are only the last of a series who have brought their slanders before me. Possibly you mean well, though I learn that you are a paid agent who would have been equally willing to act for the Baron as against him. But in any case, I wish you to understand once for all that I love him and that he loves me, and that the opinion of all the world is no more to me than the twitter of those birds outside the window. If his noble nature has ever for an instant fallen, it may be that I have been specially sent to raise it to its true and lofty level. I am not clear," here she turned her eyes upon my companion, "who this young lady may be." I was about to answer when the girl broke in like a whirlwind. If ever you saw flame and ice face to face, it was those two women. "I'll tell you who I am," she cried, springing out of her chair, her mouth all twisted with passion. "I am his last mistress. I am one of 100 that he has tempted and used and ruined and thrown into the refuse heap, as he will you also. Your refuse heap is more likely to be a grave, and maybe that's the best. I tell you, you foolish woman, if you marry this man, he'll be the death of you. It may be a broken heart, or it may be a broken neck, but he'll have you one way or the other. It's not out of love for you I'm speaking. I don't care a tinker's curse whether you live or die. It's out of hate for him, and to spite him, and to get back on him for what he did to me. But it's all the same, and you needn't look at me like that, my fine lady, for you may be lower than I am before you are through with it." "I should prefer not to discuss such matters," said Mr. Merville coldly. "Let me say once for all that I am aware of 3 passages in my fiancé's life in which he became entangled with designing women, and that I am assured of his hearty repentance for any evil that he may have done." "3 passages!" screamed my companion. "You fool! You unutterable fool! Mr. Holmes, I beg that you will bring this interview to an end," said the icy voice. "I have obeyed my father's wish in seeing you, but I am not compelled to listen to the ravings of this person." With an oath, Miss Winter darted forward, and if I had not caught her wrist, she would have clutched this maddening woman by the hair. I dragged her towards the door, and was lucky to get her back into the cab without a public scene, for she was beside herself with rage. In a cold way, I felt pretty furious myself, Watson, for there was something indescribably annoying in the calm aloofness and supreme self-complacence of the woman whom we were trying to save. So now, once again, you know exactly how we stand, and it is clear that I must plan some fresh opening move. For this gambit won't work. I'll keep in touch with you, Watson, for it is more than likely that you will have your part to play, though it is just possible that the next move may lie with them rather than with us. And it did. Their blow fell, or his blow rather, for never could I believe that the lady was privy to it. I think I could show you the very paving stone upon which I stood, when my eyes fell upon the placard, and a pang of horror passed through my very soul. It was between the Grand Hotel and Charing Cross Station, where a one-legged news vendor displayed his evening papers. The date was just 2 days after the last conversation. There, black upon yellow, was the terrible news sheet. Plus, vertical bar, murderous vertical bar, attack vertical bar upon vertical bar, Sherlock vertical bar, Holmes vertical bar, plus. I think I stood stunned for some moments. Then I have a confused recollection of snatching at a paper, of the remonstrance of the man whom I had not paid, and finally of standing in the doorway of a chemist's shop while I turned up the fateful paragraph. This was how it ran. We learn with regret that Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the well-known private detective, was the victim this morning of a murderous assault which has left him in a precarious position. There are no exact details to hand, but the event seems to have occurred about 12 o'clock in Regent Street, outside the Café Royal. The attack was made by two men armed with sticks, and Mr. Holmes was beaten about the head and body, receiving injuries which the doctors describe as most serious. He was carried to Charing Cross Hospital, and afterwards insisted upon being taken to his rooms in Baker Street. The miscreants who attacked him appear to have been respectably dressed men who escaped from the bystanders by passing through the Café Royal and out into Glasshouse Street behind it. No doubt, they belonged to that criminal fraternity which has so often had occasion to bewail the activity and ingenuity of the injured man. I need not say that my eyes had hardly glanced over the paragraph before I had sprung into a hansom and was on my way to Baker Street. I found Sir Leslie Oakshott, the famous surgeon, in the hall, and his brougham waiting at the curb. No immediate danger was his report. 2 lacerated scalp wounds and some considerable bruises. Several stitches have been necessary. Morphine has been injected, and quiet is essential. But an interview of a few minutes would not be absolutely forbidden. With this permission, I stole into the darkened room. The sufferer was wide awake, and I heard my name in a hoarse whisper. The blind was 3/4 down, but one ray of sunlight slanted through and struck the bandaged head of the injured man. A crimson patch had soaked through the white linen compress. I sat beside him and bent my head. "All right, Watson, don't look so scared," he muttered in a very weak voice. "It's not as bad as it seems." "Thank God for that." "I'm a bit of a single-stick expert, as you know. I took most of them on my guard. It was the second man that was too much for me." "What can I do, Holmes? Of course it was that damned fellow who set them on. I'll go and thrash the hide off him if you give the word." "Good old Watson. No, we can do nothing there unless the police lay their hands on the men, but their getaway had been well prepared. We may be sure of that. Wait a little. I have my plans. The first thing is to exaggerate my injuries. They'll come to you for news. Put it on thick, Watson. Lucky if I live the week out. Concussion, delirium. What you like. You can't overdo it." "But Sir Leslie Oakshott—" "Oh, he's all right. He shall see the worst side of me. I'll look after that." "Anything else?" "Yes, tell Shinwell Johnson to get that girl out of the way. Those beauties will be after her now. They know, of course, that she was with me in the case. If they dared to do me in it, is not likely they will neglect her. That is urgent. Do it tonight." "I'll go now. Anything more?" "Put my pipe on the table and the tobacco slipper, right? Come in each morning, and we will plan our campaign." I arranged with Johnson that evening to take Miss Winter to a quiet suburb and see that she lay low until the danger was past. For 6 days, the public were under the impression that Holmes was at the door of death. The bulletins were very grave, and there were sinister paragraphs in the papers. My continual visits assured me that it was not so bad as that. His wiry constitution and his determined will were working wonders. He was recovering fast, and I had suspicions at times that he was really finding himself faster than he pretended, even to me. There was a curious, secretive streak in the man which led to many dramatic effects, but left even his closest friend guessing as to what his exact plans might be. He pushed to an extreme the axiom that the only safe plotter was he who plotted alone. I was nearer him than anyone else, and yet I was always conscious of the gap between. On the 7th day, the stitches were taken out. in spite of which there was a report of erysipelas in the evening papers. The same evening papers had an announcement which I was bound, sick or well, to carry to my friend. It was simply that among the passengers on the Cunard boat Ruritania, starting from Liverpool on Friday, was the Baron Adalbert Gruner, who had some important financial business to settle in the States before his impending wedding to Miss Violet de Merville, only daughter of etc., etc. Holmes listened to the news with a cold, concentrated look upon his pale face, which told me that it hit him hard. "Friday!" he cried. "Only 3 clear days! I believe the rascal wants to put himself out of danger's way. But he won't, Watson. By the Lord Harry, he won't. Now, Watson, I want you to do something for me." "I am here to be used, Holmes." "Well, then, spend the next 24 hours in an intensive study of Chinese pottery." He gave no explanations, and I asked for none. By long experience, I had learned the wisdom of obedience. But when I had left his room, I walked down Baker Street, revolving in my head how on earth I was to carry out so strange an order. Finally, I drove to the London Library in St. James's Square, put the matter to my friend Lomax, the sub-librarian, and departed to my rooms with a goodly volume under my arm. It is said that the barrister who crams up a case with such care that he can examine an expert witness upon the Monday has forgotten all his forced knowledge before the Saturday. Certainly, I should not like now to pose as an authority upon ceramics, and yet all that evening, and all that night with a short interval for rest, and all next morning, I was sucking in knowledge and committing names to memory. There I learned of the hallmarks of the great artist-decorators, of the mystery of cyclical dates, the marks of the Hung Wu, and the beauties of the Yung Lo, the writings of Tang Ying, and the glories of the primitive period of the Sung and the Yuan. I was charged with all this information when I called upon Holmes next evening. He was out of bed now, though you would not have guessed it from the published reports, and he sat with his much-bandaged head resting upon his hand in the depth of his favourite armchair. "Why, Holmes," I said, "if one believed the papers, you are dying." "That," said he, "is the very impression which I intended to convey." "And now, Watson, have you learned your lessons?" "At least I have tried to." "Good. You could keep up an intelligent conversation on the subject?" "I believe I could." "Then hand me that little box from the mantelpiece." He opened the lid and took out a small object most carefully wrapped in some fine Eastern silk. This he unfolded and disclosed a delicate little saucer of the most beautiful deep blue color. "It needs careful handling, Watson. This is the real eggshell pottery of the Ming dynasty. No finer piece ever passed through Christie's. A complete set of this would be worth a king's ransom. In fact, it is doubtful if there is a complete set outside the imperial palace of Peking. The sight of this would drive a real connoisseur wild." "What am I to do with it?" Holmes handed me a card upon which was printed, "Dr. Hill Barton, 369 Half Moon Street." "That is your name for the evening, Watson. You will call upon Gruner. I know something of his habits, and at 8:30 he would probably be disengaged. A note will tell him in advance that you are about to call, and you will say that you are bringing him a specimen of an absolutely unique set of Ming china. You may as a medical man, since that is a part which you can play without duplicity. Lector, this set has come your way. You have heard of the Baron's interest in the subject, and you are not averse to selling at a price." "What price?" "Well asked, Watson. You would certainly fall down badly if you did not know the value of your own wares. This saucer was got for me by Sir James, and comes, I understand, from the collection of his client." "You will not exaggerate if you say that it could hardly be matched in the world." "I could perhaps suggest that the set should be valued by an expert." "Excellent, Watson. You scintillate today. Suggest Christie or Sotheby. Your delicacy prevents your putting a price for yourself. But if he won't see me? Oh yes, he will see you. He has the collection mania in its most acute form, and especially on this subject, on which he is an acknowledged authority. Sit down, Watson, and I will dictate the letter. No answer needed. You will merely say that you are coming and why. It was an admirable document, short, courteous, and stimulating to the curiosity of the connoisseur. A district messenger was duly dispatched with it. On the same evening, with the precious saucer in my hand and the card of Dr. Hill Barton in my pocket, I set off on my own adventure. The beautiful house and grounds indicated that Baron Gruner was, as Sir James had said, a man of considerable wealth. A long, winding drive, with banks of rare shrubs on either side, opened out into a great gravelled square adorned with statues. The place had been built by a South African gold king in the days of the great boom, and the long, low house with the turrets at the corners, though an architectural nightmare, was imposing in its size and solidity. A butler who would have adorned a bench of bishops showed me in, and handed me over to a plush-clad footman who ushered me into the Baron's presence. He was standing at the open front of a great case which stood between the windows, and which contained part of his Chinese collection. He turned as I entered with a small brown vase in his hand. "Pray sit down, Doctor," said he. "I was looking over my own treasures and wondering whether I could really afford to add to them. This little Tang specimen, which dates from the 7th century, would probably interest you. I'm sure you never saw finer workmanship or a richer glaze. Have you the Ming saucer with you of which you spoke?" I carefully unpacked it and handed it to him. He seated himself at his desk, pulled over the lamp, for it was growing dark, and set himself to examine it. As he did so, the yellow light beat upon his own features, and I was able to study them at my ease. He was certainly a remarkably handsome man. His European reputation for beauty was fully deserved. In figure, he was not more than of middle size, but was built upon graceful and active lines. His face was swarthy, almost oriental, with large, dark, languorous eyes, which might easily hold an irresistible fascination for women. His hair and moustache were raven black, the latter short, pointed, and carefully waxed. His features were regular and pleasing, save only his straight, thin-lipped mouth. If ever I saw a murderer's mouth, it was there. A cruel, hard gash in the face, compressed, inexorable, and terrible. He was ill-advised to train his moustache away from it, for it was nature's danger signal set as a warning to his victims. His voice was engaging and his manners perfect. In age, I should have put him at little over 30, though his record afterwards showed that he was 42. Very fine indeed," he said at last. "And you say you have a set of 6 to correspond. What puzzles me is that I should not have heard of such magnificent specimens. I only know of one in England to match this, and it is certainly not likely to be in the market. Would it be indiscreet if I were to ask you, Dr. Hill Barton, how you obtained this?" "Does it really matter?" I asked, with as careless an air as I could muster. "You can see that the piece is genuine, and as to the value, I am content to take an expert's valuation." "Very mysterious," said he, with a quick, suspicious flash of his dark eyes. "In dealing with objects of such value, one naturally wishes to know all about the transaction. That the piece is genuine is certain. I have no doubts at all about that. But suppose I am bound to take every possibility into account, that it should prove afterwards that you had no right to sell. I would guarantee you against any claim of the sort. That, of course, would open up the question as to what your guarantee was worth." "My bankers would answer that." "Quite so, and yet the whole transaction strikes me as rather unusual." "You can do business or not," said I with indifference. "I have given you the first offer, as I understood that you were a connoisseur, but I shall have no difficulty in other quarters." "Who told you I was a connoisseur?" "I was aware that you had written a book upon the subject." Have you read the book? No. Dear me, this becomes more and more difficult for me to understand. You are a connoisseur and collector with a very valuable piece in your collection, and yet you have never troubled to consult the one book which would have told you of the real meaning and value of what you held. How do you explain that? I am a very busy man. I am a doctor in practice. That is no answer. If a man has a hobby, he follows it up, whatever his other pursuits may be. You said in your that you were a connoisseur. So I am. Might I ask you a few questions to test you? I am obliged to tell you, doctor, if you are indeed a doctor, that the incident becomes more and more suspicious. I would ask you, what do you know of the Emperor Shomu, and how do you associate him with the Shoso Inn near Nara? Dear me, does that puzzle you? Tell me a little about the Northern Wei dynasty and its place in the history of ceramics. I sprang from my chair in simulated anger. This is intolerable, sir, said I. I came here to do you a favor, and not to be examined as if I were a schoolboy. My knowledge on these subjects may be second only to your own, but I certainly shall not answer questions which have been put in so offensive a way. He looked at me steadily. The languor had gone from his eyes. They suddenly glared. There was a gleam of teeth from between those cruel lips. What is the game? You are here as a spy. You are an emissary of Holmes. This is a trick that you are playing upon me. The fellow is dying, I hear, so he sends his tools to keep watch upon me. You've made your way in here without leave, and by God, you may find it harder to get out than to get in. He had sprung to his feet, and I stepped back, bracing myself for an attack, for the man was beside himself with rage. He may have suspected me from the first. Certainly this cross-examination had shown him the truth, but it was clear that I could not hope to deceive him. He dived his hand into a side drawer and rummaged furiously. Then something struck upon his ear, for he stood listening intently. "Ah!" he cried. "Ah!" and dashed into the room behind him. 2 steps took me to the open door, and my mind will ever carry a clear picture of the scene within. The window leading out to the garden was wide open. Beside it, looking like some terrible ghost, his head girt with bloody bandages, his face drawn and white, stood Sherlock Holmes. The next instant he was through the gap, and I heard the crash of his body among the laurel bushes outside. With a howl of rage, the master of the house rushed after him to the open window, and then it was done in an instant, and yet I clearly saw it. An arm, a woman's arm, shot out from among the leaves. At the same instant the Baron uttered a horrible cry, a yell which will always ring in my memory. He clapped his 2 hands to his face and rushed round the room, beating his head horribly against the walls. Then he fell upon the carpet, rolling and writhing, while scream after scream resounded through the house. "Water! For God's sake, water!" was his cry. I seized a carafe from a side table and rushed to his aid. At the same moment, the butler and several footmen ran in from the hall. I remember that one of them fainted as I knelt by the injured man and turned that awful face to the light of the lamp. The vitriol was eating into it everywhere and dripping from the ears and the chin. One eye was already white and glazed. The other was red and inflamed. The features which I had admired a few minutes before were now like some beautiful painting over which the artist has passed a wet and foul sponge. They were blurred, discolored, inhuman, terrible. In a few words, I explained exactly what had occurred, so far as the vitriol attack was concerned. Some had climbed through the window, and others had rushed out onto the lawn. But it was dark, and it had begun to rain. Between his screams, the victim raged and raved against the avenger. "It was that hellcat, Kitty Winter," he cried. "Oh, the she-devil! She shall pay for it! She shall pay! Oh, God in heaven, this pain is more than I can bear!" I bathed his face in oil, put cotton wadding on the raw surfaces, and administered a hypodermic of morphia. All suspicion of me had passed from his mind in the presence of this shock, and he clung to my hands as if I might have the power even yet to clear those dead fish eyes which gazed up at me. I could have wept over the ruin had I not remembered very clearly the vile life which had led up to so hideous a change. It was loathsome to feel the pouring of his burning hands, and I was relieved when his family surgeon, closely followed by a specialist, came to relieve me of my charge. An inspector of police had also arrived, and to him I handed my real card. It would have been useless as well as foolish to do otherwise, for I was nearly as well known by sight at the Yard as Holmes himself. Then I left that house of gloom and terror. Within an hour I was at Baker Street. Holmes was seated in his familiar chair, looking very pale and exhausted. Apart from his injuries, even his iron nerves had been shocked by the events of the evening, and he listened with horror to my account of the Baron's transformation. "The wages of sin, Watson, the wages of sin," said he. "Sooner or later it will always come. God knows there was sin enough," he added, taking up a brown volume from the table. "Here is the book the woman talked of. If this will not break off the marriage, nothing ever could. But it will, Watson. It must. No self-respecting woman could stand it." It is his love diary? Or his lust diary? Call it what you will. The moment the woman told us of it, I realized what a tremendous weapon was there, if we could but lay our hands on it. I said nothing at the time to indicate my thoughts, for this woman might have given it away. But I brooded over it. Then, this assault upon me gave me the chance of letting the Baron think that no precautions need be taken against me. That was all to the good. I would have waited a little longer, but his visit to America forced my hand. He would never have left so compromising a document behind him. Therefore, we had to act at once. Burglary at night is impossible. He takes precautions, but there was a chance in the evening if I could only be sure that his attention was engaged. That was where you and your blue saucer came in. But I had to be sure of the position of the book, and I knew I had only a few minutes in which to act, for my time was limited by your knowledge of Chinese pottery. Therefore I gathered the girl up at the last moment. How could I guess what the little packet was that she carried so carefully under her cloak? I thought she had come altogether on my business, but it seems she had some of her own. He guessed I came from you. I feared he would. But you held him in play just long enough for me to get the book, though not long enough for an unobserved escape. Ah, Sir James, I am very glad you have come." Our courtly friend had appeared in answer to a previous summons. He listened with the deepest attention to Holmes's account of what had occurred. "You have done wonders, wonders," he cried, when he had heard the narrative. "But if these injuries are as terrible as Dr. Watson describes, then surely our purpose of thwarting the marriage is sufficiently gained without the use of this horrible book." Holmes shook his head. "Women of the de Merville type do not act like that. She would love him the more as a disfigured martyr. No, no. It is his moral side, not his physical, which we have to destroy. That book will bring her back to earth, and I know nothing else that could. It is in his own writing. She cannot get past it." Sir James carried away both it and the precious saucer. As I was myself overdue, I went down with him into the street. A brougham was waiting for him. He sprang in, gave a hurried order to the cockaded coachman, and drove swiftly away. He flung his overcoat half out of the window to cover the armorial bearings upon the panel, but I had seen them in the glare of our fanlight none the less. I gasped with surprise. Then I turned back and ascended the stair to Holmes's room. "I have found out who our client is," I cried, bursting with my great news. "Why, Holmes, it is—" "It is a loyal friend and a chivalrous gentleman," said Holmes, holding up a restraining hand. "Let that now and forever be enough for us." I do not know how the incriminating book was used. Sir James may have managed it, or it is more probable that so delicate a task was entrusted to the young lady's father. The effect, at any rate, was all that could be desired. 3 days later appeared a paragraph in the Morning Post to say that the marriage between Baron Adalbert Gruner and Miss Violet de Merville would not take place. The same paper had the first police court hearing of the proceedings against Miss Kitty Winter on the grave charge of vitriol throwing. Such extenuating circumstances came out in the trial that the sentence, as will be remembered, was the lowest that was possible for such an offence. Sherlock Holmes was threatened with a prosecution for burglary, but when an object is good and a client is sufficiently illustrious, even the rigid British law becomes human and elastic. My friend has not yet stood in the dock. Chapter 2. The Adventure of the Blanched Soldier. The ideas of my friend Watson, though limited, are exceedingly pertinacious. For a long time he has worried me to write an experience of my own. Perhaps I have rather invited this persecution, since I have often had occasion to point out to him how superficial are his own accounts, and to accuse him of pandering to popular taste instead of confining himself rigidly to facts and figures. "Try it yourself, Holmes," he has retorted, and I am compelled to admit that having taken my pen in my hand, I do begin to realize that the matter must be presented in such a way as may interest the reader. The following case can hardly fail to do so, as it is among the strangest happenings in my collection, though it chanced that Watson had no note of it in his collection. Speaking of my old friend and biographer, I would take this opportunity to remark that if I burden myself with a companion in my various little inquiries, it is not done out of sentiment or caprice, but it is that Watson has some remarkable characteristics of his own, to which, in his modesty, he has given small attention amid his exaggerated estimates of my own performances. A confederate who foresees your conclusions and course of action is always dangerous, but one to whom each development comes as a perpetual surprise, and to whom the future is always a closed book, is indeed an ideal helpmate. I find from my notebook that it was in January 1903, just after the conclusion of the Boer War, that I had my visit from Mr. James M. Dodd, a big, fresh, sunburned, upstanding Briton. The good Watson had at that time deserted me for a wife, the only selfish action which I can recall in our association. I was alone. It is my habit to sit with my back to the window and to place my visitors in the opposite chair, where the light falls full upon them. Mr. James M. Dodd seemed somewhat at a loss how to begin the interview. I did not attempt to help him, for his silence gave me more time for observation. I have found it wise to impress clients with a sense of power, and so I gave him some of my conclusions. "From South Africa, sir, I perceive." "Yes, sir," he answered with some surprise. "Imperial Yeomanry, I fancy." "Exactly. Middlesex Corps, no doubt." "That is so. Mr. Holmes, you are a wizard." I smiled at his bewildered expression. When a gentleman of virile appearance enters my room with such tan upon his face as an English sun could never give, and with his handkerchief in his sleeve instead of in his pocket, it is not difficult to place him. You wear a short beard, which shows that you are not a regular. You have the cut of a riding man. As to Middlesex, your card has already shown me that you are a stockbroker from Throgmorton Street. What other regiment would you join? You see everything? I see no more than you, but I have trained myself to notice what I see. However, Mr. Dodd, it was not to discuss the science of observation that you called upon me this morning. What has been happening at Tuxbury Old Park? Mr. Holmes, my dear sir, there is no mystery. Your letter came with that heading, and as you fixed this appointment in very pressing terms, it was clear that something sudden and important had occurred. Yes, indeed. But the letter was written in the afternoon, and a good deal has happened since then. If Colonel Emsworth had not kicked me out— Kicked you out! Well, that was what it amounted to. He's a hard nail, is Colonel Emsworth, the greatest martinet in the army in his day. And it was a day of rough language, too. I couldn't have stuck the colonel if it had not been for Godfrey's sake. I lit my pipe and leaned back in my chair. Perhaps you will explain what you're talking about. My client grinned mischievously. I had got into the way of supposing that you knew everything without being told, said he. But I will give you the facts, and I hope to God that you will be able to tell me what they mean. I've been awake all night puzzling my brain, and the more I think, the more incredible does it become. When I joined up in January 1901, just 2 years ago, young Godfrey Emsworth had joined the same squadron. He was Colonel Emsworth's only son, Emsworth, the Crimean VC, and he had the fighting blood in him, so it is no wonder he volunteered. There was not a finer lad in the regiment. We formed a friendship, the sort of friendship which can only be made when one lives the same life and shares the same joys and sorrows. He was my mate, and that means a good deal in the army. We took the rough and the smooth together for a year of hard fighting. Then he was hit with a bullet from an elephant gun in the action near Diamond Hill, outside Pretoria. I got one letter from the hospital at Cape Town and one from Southampton. Since then, not a word, not one word, Mr. Holmes, for 6 months and more, and he my closest pal. Well, when the war was over and we all got back, I wrote to his father and asked where Godfrey was. No answer. I waited a bit, and then I wrote again. This time I had a reply, short and gruff. Godfrey had gone on a voyage round the world, and it was not likely that he would be back for a year. That was all. I wasn't satisfied, Mr. Holmes. The whole thing seemed to me so damned unnatural. He was a good lad, and he would not drop a pal like that. It was not like him. Then again, I happened to know that he was heir to a lot of money, and also that his father and he did not always hit it off too well. The old man was sometimes a bully, and young Godfrey had too much spirit to stand it. No, I wasn't satisfied, and I determined that I would get to the root of the matter. It happened, however, that my own affairs needed a lot of straightening out after 2 years' absence, and so it is only this week that I have been able to take up Godfrey's case again. But since I have taken it up, I mean to drop everything in order to see it through. Mr. James M. Dodd appeared to be the sort of person whom it would be better to have as a friend than as an enemy. His blue eyes were stern, and his square jaw had set hard as he spoke. "Well, what have you done?" I asked. My first move was to get down to his home, Tuxbury Old Park, near Bedford, and to see for myself how the ground lay. I wrote to the mother, therefore. I had had quite enough of the curmudgeon of a father, and I made a clean frontal attack. Godfrey was my chum. I had a great deal of interest which I might tell her of our common experiences. I should be in the neighbourhood. Would there be any objection, etc.? In reply, I had quite an amiable answer from her, and an offer to put me up for the night. That was what took me down on Monday. Tuxbury Old Hall is inaccessible, 5 miles from anywhere. There was no trap at the station, so I had to walk, carrying my suitcase, and it was nearly dark before I arrived. It is a great wandering house, standing in a considerable park. I should judge it was of all sorts of ages and styles, starting on a half-timbered Elizabethan foundation and ending in a Victorian portico. Inside it was all panelling and tapestry and half-effaced old pictures, a house of shadows and mystery. There was a butler, old Ralph, who seemed about the same age as the house, and there was his wife, who might have been older. She had been Godfrey's nurse, and I had heard him speak of her as second only to his mother in his affections, so I was drawn to her in spite of her queer appearance. The mother I liked also, a gentle little white mouse of a woman. It was only the colonel himself whom I barred. We had a bit of a barney right away, and I should have walked back to the station if I had not felt that it might be playing his game for me to do so. I was shown straight into his study, and there I found him, a huge bull-backed man with a smoky skin and a straggling grey beard, seated behind his littered desk. A red-veined nose jutted out like a vulture's beak, and two fierce grey eyes glared at me from under tufted brows. I could understand now why Godfrey seldom spoke of his father. "Well, sir," said he in a rasping voice, "I should be interested to know the real reasons for this visit." I answered that I had explained them in my letter to his wife. Chapter 1. The Adventure of the Mazarin Stone. It was pleasant to Dr. Watson to find himself once more in the untidy room of the first floor in Baker Street, which had been the starting point of so many remarkable adventures. He looked round him at the scientific charts upon the wall, the acid-charred bench of chemicals, the violin case leaning in the corner, the coal scuttle, which contained of old the pipes and tobacco. Finally, his eyes came round to the fresh and smiling face of Billy, the young but very wise and tactful page, who had helped a little to fill up the gap of loneliness and isolation which surrounded the saturnine figure of the great detective. "It all seems very unchanged, Billy." "You don't change either. I hope the same can be said of him?" Billy glanced, with some solicitude, at the closed door of the bedroom. "I think he's in bed and asleep," he said. It was 7 in the evening of a lovely summer's day, but Dr. Watson was sufficiently familiar with the irregularity of his old friend's hours to feel no surprise at the idea. "That means a case, I suppose?" "Yes, sir. He's very hard at it just now. I'm frightened for his health. He gets paler and thinner, and he eats nothing." "When will you be pleased to dine, Mr. Holmes?" Mrs. Hudson asked. 7:30, the day after tomorrow," said he. "You know his way when he is keen on a case." "Yes, Billy, I know." "He's following someone. Yesterday he was out as a workman looking for a job. Today he was an old woman. Fairly took me in, he did, and I ought to know his ways by now." Billy pointed with a grin to a very baggy parasol which leaned against the sofa. "That's part of the old woman's outfit," he said. "But what is it all about, Billy?" Billy sank his voice as one who discusses great secrets of state. "I don't mind telling you, sir, but it should go no farther. It's this case of the Crown Diamond." "What, the £100,000 burglary?" "Yes, sir. They must get it back, sir. Why, we had the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary both sitting on that very sofa. Mr. Holmes was very nice to them. He soon put them at their ease and promised he would do all he could. Then there is Lord Cantlemere." "Ah! Yes, sir. You know what that means. He's a stiff 'un, sir, if I may say so. I can get along with the Prime Minister, and I've nothing against the Home Secretary, who seemed a civil, obliging sort of man, but I can't stand his lordship. Neither can Mr. Holmes, sir. You see, he don't believe in Mr. Holmes, and he was against employing him. He'd rather he failed." "And Mr. Holmes knows it?" "Mr. Holmes always knows whatever there is to know." "Well, we'll hope he won't fail, and that Lord Cantlemere will be confounded. But I say, Billy, what is that curtain for across the window?" "Mr. Holmes had it put up there 3 days ago. We've got something funny behind it." Billy advanced and drew away the drapery which screened the alcove of the bow window. Dr. Watson could not restrain a cry of amazement. There was a facsimile of his old friend, dressing-gown and all, the face turned 3/4 towards the window and downwards, as though reading an invisible book, while the body was sunk deep in an armchair. Billy detached the head and held it in the air. "We put it at different angles so that it may seem more lifelike. I wouldn't dare touch it if the blind were not down. But when it's up, you can see this from across the way. We used something of the sort once before." "Before my time," said Billy. He drew the window curtains apart and looked out into the street. There are folk who watch us from over yonder. I can see a fellow now at the window. Have a look for yourself." Watson had taken a step forward when the bedroom door opened, and the long, thin form of Holmes emerged, his face pale and drawn, but his step and bearing as active as ever. With a single spring, he was at the window and had drawn the blind once more. "That will do, Billy," said he. "You were in danger of your life then, my boy, and I can't do without you just yet. Well, Watson, it is good to see you in your old quarters once again. You come at a critical moment. So I gather. You can go, Billy. That boy is a problem, Watson. How far am I justified in allowing him to be in danger?" "Danger of what, Holmes?" "Of sudden death. I'm expecting something this evening." "Expecting what?" "To be murdered, Watson." "No, no, you are joking, Holmes." Even my limited sense of humor could evolve a better joke than that. But we may be comfortable in the meantime, may we not? Is alcohol permitted? The gasogene and cigars are in the old place. Let me see you once more in the customary armchair. You have not, I hope, learned to despise my pipe and my lamentable tobacco. It has to take the place of food these days. But why not eat? Because the faculties become refined when you starve them. Why, surely as a doctor, my dear Watson, you must admit that what your digestion gains in the way of blood supply is so much lost to the brain. I am a brain, Watson. The rest of me is a mere appendix. Therefore it is the brain I must consider. But this danger, Holmes? Ah, yes. In case it should come off, it would perhaps be as well that you should burden your memory with the name and address of the murderer. You can give it to Scotland Yard, with my love and a parting blessing. Silvius is the name. Count Negretto Silvius. Write it down, man. Write it down. 136 Moorside Gardens, NW, got it? Watson's honest face was twitching with anxiety. He knew only too well the immense risks taken by Holmes, and was well aware that what he said was more likely to be understatement than exaggeration. Watson was always the man of action, and he rose to the occasion. "Count me in, Holmes. I have nothing to do for a day or two." "Your morals don't improve, Watson. You have added fibbing to your other vices. You bear every sign of the busy medical man with calls on him every hour. Not such important ones. But can't you have this fellow arrested?" "Yes, Watson, I could. That's what worries him so." "But why don't you?" "Because I don't know where the diamond is." "Ah, Billy told me. The missing crown jewel. Yes, the great yellow Mazarin stone. I've cast my net, and I have my fish. But I have not got the stone. What is the use of taking them? We can make the world a better place by laying them by the heels. But that is not what I am out for. It's the stone I want." "And is this Count Silvius one of your fish?" "Yes, and he's a shark. He bites. The other is Sam Merton, the boxer. Not a bad fellow, Sam, but the Count has used him. Sam's not a shark. He is a great big, silly, bull-headed gudgeon, but he is flopping about in my net all the same." "Where is this Count Silvius?" "I've been at his very elbow all the morning. You've seen me as an old lady, Watson. I was never more convincing. He actually picked up my parasol for me once. 'By your leave, madame,' said he, half Italian, you know, and with the southern graces of manner when in the mood, but a devil incarnate in the other mood. Life is full of whimsical happenings, Watson." "It might have been tragedy." "Well, perhaps it might. I followed him to old Straubenzie's workshop in the Minories. Straubenzee made the air gun, a very pretty bit of work, as I understand, and I rather fancy it is in the opposite window at the present moment. Have you seen the dummy?" "Of course, Billy showed it to you. Well, it may get a bullet through its beautiful head at any moment." "Ah, Billy, what is it?" The boy had reappeared in the room with a card upon a tray. Holmes glanced at it with raised eyebrows and an amused smile. "The man himself. I had hardly expected this. Grasp the nettle, Watson. A man of nerve. Possibly you have heard of his reputation as a shooter of big game. It would indeed be a triumphant ending to his excellent sporting record if he added me to his bag. This is a proof that he feels my toe very close behind his heel. Send for the police." "I probably shall, but not just yet. Would you glance carefully out of the window, Watson, and see if anyone is hanging about in the street?" Watson looked warily round the edge of the curtain. "Yes, there is one rough fellow near the door. That will be Sam Merton, the faithful but rather fatuous Sam. Where is this gentleman, Billy?" "In the waiting room, sir." "Show him up when I ring." "Yes, sir." "If I am not in the room, show him in all the same." "Yes, sir." Watson waited until the door was closed, and then he turned earnestly to his companion. "Look here, Holmes, this is simply impossible. This is a desperate man who sticks at nothing. He may have come to murder you." "I should not be surprised." "I insist upon staying with you." "You would be horribly in the way." "In his way?" "No, my dear fellow, in my way." "Well, I can't possibly leave you." "Yes, you can, Watson, and you will, for you have never failed to play the game. I am sure you will play it to the end. This man has come for his own purpose, but he may stay for mine." Holmes took out his notebook and scribbled a few lines. "Take a cab to Scotland Yard, and give this to Ugol of the CID. Come back with the police. The fellow's arrest will follow." "I'll do that with joy. Before you return, I may have just time enough to find out where the stone is." He touched the bell. "I think we will go out through the bedroom. This second exit is exceedingly useful. I rather want to see my shark without his seeing me, and I have, as you will remember, my own way of doing it." It was, therefore, an empty room into which Billy, a minute later, ushered Count Silvius. The famous game-shot, sportsman, and man about town was a big, swarthy fellow with a formidable dark moustache, shading a cruel, thin-lipped mouth, and surmounted by a long, curved nose like the beak of an eagle. He was well dressed, but his brilliant necktie, shining pin, and glittering rings were flamboyant in their effect. As the door closed behind him, he looked round him with fierce, startled eyes, like one who suspects a trap at every turn. Then he gave a violent start as he saw the impassive head and the collar of the dressing-gown which projected above the armchair in the window. At first his expression was one of pure amazement. Then the light of a horrible hope gleamed in his dark, murderous eyes. He took one more glance round, to see that there were no witnesses, and then, on tiptoe, his thick stick half raised, he approached the silent figure. He was crouching for his final spring and blow when a cool, sardonic voice greeted him from the open bedroom door. "Don't break it, Count! Don't break it!" The assassin staggered back, amazement in his convulsed face. For an instant, he half raised his loaded cane once more, as if he would turn his violence from the effigy to the original. But there was something in that steady grey eye and mocking smile which caused his hand to sink to his side. "It's a pretty little thing," said Holmes, advancing towards the image. "Tavernier, the French modeller, made it. He is as good at waxworks as your friend Straubenzee is at air guns." "Air guns, sir? What do you mean?" "Put your hat and stick on the side table. Thank you. Pray take a seat. Would you care to put your revolver out also?" "Oh, very good, if you prefer to sit upon it. Your visit is really most opportune, for I wanted badly to have a few minutes' chat with you." The Count scowled, with heavy, threatening eyebrows. "I, too, wish to have some words with you, Holmes. That is why I am here. I won't deny that I intended to assault you just now." Holmes swung his leg on the edge of the table. "I rather gathered that you had some idea of the sort in your head," said he. "But why these personal attentions?" "Because you have gone out of your way to annoy me, because you have put your creatures upon my track." "My creatures, I assure you no." "Nonsense. I have had them followed. Two can play at that game, Holmes." "It is a small point, Count Silvius, but perhaps you would kindly give me my prefix when you address me. You can understand that with my routine of work, I should find myself on familiar terms with half the rogues' gallery, and you will agree that exceptions are invidious." "Well, Mr. Holmes, then?" "Excellent. But I assure you, you are mistaken about my alleged agents." Count Silvius laughed contemptuously. "Other people can observe as well as you. Yesterday there was an old sporting man. Today it was an elderly woman. They held me in view all day." "Really, sir, you compliment me. Old Baron Dowson said the night before he was hanged that in my case what the law had gained the stage had lost. And now you give my little impersonations your kindly praise." "It was you? You yourself?" Holmes shrugged his shoulders. "You can see in the corner the parasol which you so politely handed to me in the Minories before you began to suspect. If I had known, you might never have seen this humble home again. I was well aware of it. We all have neglected opportunities to deplore. As it happens, you did not know, so here we are." The Count's knotted brows gathered more heavily over his menacing eyes. "What you say only makes the matter worse. It was not your agents, but your play-acting busybody self. You admit that you have dogged me. Why?" "Come now, Count. You used to shoot lions in Algeria." "Well? But why? Why, the sport, the excitement, the danger. And no doubt to free the country from a pest?" "Exactly. My reasons in a nutshell." The Count sprang to his feet, and his hand involuntarily moved back to his hip pocket. "Sit down, sir, sit down. There was another, more practical reason. I want that yellow diamond." Count Silvius lay back in his chair with an evil smile. "Upon my word," said he, "you knew that I was after you for that. The real reason why you are here tonight is to find out how much I know about the matter and how far my removal is absolutely essential. Well, I should say that from your point of view it is absolutely essential, for I know all about it, save only one thing, which you are about to tell me." "Oh, indeed. And pray what is this missing fact?" "Where the crown diamond now is." The Count looked sharply at his companion. "Oh, you want to know that, do you? How the devil should I be able to tell you where it is? You can, and you will." "Indeed." "You can't bluff me, Count Silvius." Holmes's eyes, as he gazed at him, contracted and lightened until they were like two menacing points of steel. "You are absolute plate glass. I see to the very back of your mind." "Then, of course, you see where the diamond is." Holmes clapped his hands with amusement and then pointed a derisive finger. "Then you do know? You have admitted it." "I admit nothing." "Now, Count, if you will be reasonable, we can do business. If not, you will get hurt." Count Silvius threw up his eyes to the ceiling. "And you talk about bluff," said he. Holmes looked at him thoughtfully, like a master chess player who meditates his crowning move. Then he threw open the table drawer and drew out a squat notebook. "Do you know what I keep in this book?" "No, sir, I do not." "You? Me?" "Yes, sir, you. You are all here, every action of your vile and dangerous life." "Damn you, Holmes!" cried the Count with blazing eyes. "There are limits to my patience." "It's all here, Count. The real facts as to the death of old Mrs. Harold, who left you the Blymer estate, which you so rapidly gambled away." "You are dreaming." "And the complete life history of Miss Minnie Warrender." "Tut! You will make nothing of that. Plenty more here, Count. Here is the robbery in the train deluxe to the Riviera on February 13th, 1892. Here is the forged check in the same year on the Credit Lyonnais. No, you're wrong there. Then I'm right on the others. Now, Count, you are a card player. When the other fellow has all the trumps, it saves time to throw down your hand. What has all this talk to do with the duel of which you spoke? Gently, Count. Restrain that eager mind. Let me get to the points in my own humdrum fashion. I have all this against you. But above all, I have a clear case against both you and your fighting bully in the case of the Crown Diamond. Indeed. I have the cabman who took you to Whitehall and the cabman who brought you away. I have the commissionaire who saw you near the case. I have Ikey Sanders who refused to cut it up for you. Ikey has peached and the game is up. The veins stood out on the Count's forehead. His dark, hairy hands were clenched in a convulsion of restrained emotion. He tried to speak, but the words would not shape themselves. "That's the hand I play from," said Holmes. "I put it all upon the table, but one card is missing. It's the King of Diamonds. I don't know where the stone is." "You never shall know." "No? Now be reasonable, Count. Consider the situation. You're going to be locked up for 20 years. So is Sam Merton. What good are you going to get out of your diamond? None in the world. But if you hand it over, well, I'll compound a felony. We don't want you or Sam. We want the stone. Give that up, and so far as I am concerned, you can go free so long as you behave yourself in the future. If you make another slip, well, it will be the last. But this time my commission is to get the stone, not you." "But if I refuse—" "Why then, alas, it must be you and not the stone." Billy had appeared in answer to a ring. "I think, Count, that it would be as well to have your friend Sam at this conference. After all, his interests should be represented. Billy, you will see a large and ugly gentleman outside the front door. Ask him to come up." "If he won't come, sir?" "No violence, Billy. Don't be rough with him. If you tell him that Count Silvius wants him, he will certainly come." "What are you going to do now?" asked the Count as Billy disappeared. "My friend Watson was with me just now. I told him that I had a shark and a gudgeon in my net. Now I'm drawing the net, and up they come together." The Count had risen from his chair, and his hand was behind his back. Holmes held something half protruding from the pocket of his dressing gown. "You won't die in your bed, Holmes." "I have often had the same idea. Does it matter very much? After all, Count, your own exit is more likely to be perpendicular than horizontal, but these anticipations of the future are morbid. Why not give ourselves up to the unrestrained enjoyment of the present?" A sudden wild beast light sprang up in the dark, menacing eyes of the master criminal. Holmes's figure seemed to grow taller as he grew tense and ready. "It is no use your fingering your revolver, my friend," he said in a quiet voice. "You know perfectly well that you dare not use it, even if I gave you time to draw it." "Nasty, noisy things, revolvers, Count. Better stick to air guns. Ah! I think I hear the fairy footstep of your estimable partner. Good day, Mr. Merton. Rather dull in the street, is it not?" The prize-fighter, a heavily built young man with a stupid, obstinate, slab-sided face, stood awkwardly at the door, looking about him with a puzzled expression. Holmes's debonair manner was a new experience, and though he vaguely felt that it was hostile, he did not know how to counter it. He turned to his more astute comrade for help. "What's the game now, Count? What's this fellow want? What's up?" His voice was deep and raucous. The Count shrugged his shoulders, and it was Holmes who answered. "If I may put it in a nutshell, Mr. Merton, I should say it was all up." The boxer still addressed his remarks to his associate. "Is this cove trying to be funny, or what? I'm not in the funny mood myself." "No, I expect not," said Holmes. "I think I can promise you that you will feel even less humorous as the evening advances. Now look here, Count Silvius. I'm a busy man and I can't waste time. I'm going into that bedroom. Pray make yourselves quite at home in my absence. You can explain to your friend how the matter lies without the restraint of my presence. I shall try over the Hoffmann barcarolle upon my violin. In 5 minutes I shall return for your final answer. You quite grasp the alternative, do you not? Shall we take you, or shall we have the stone? Holmes withdrew, picking up his violin from the corner as he passed. A few moments later the long-drawn, wailing notes of that most haunting of tunes came faintly through the closed door of the bedroom. "What is it, then?" asked Merton anxiously, as his companion turned to him. "Does he know about the stone?" "He knows a damned sight too much about it. I'm not sure that he doesn't know all about it." "Good Lord!" The boxer's sallow face turned a shade whiter. "Ikey Sanders has split on us." "He has he? I'll do him down a thick un for that if I swing for it." "That won't help us much. We've got to make up our minds what to do." "Half a mo," said the boxer, looking suspiciously at the bedroom door. "He's a leery cove that wants watching. I suppose he's not listening." "How can he be listening with that music going?" "That's right, maybe somebody's behind a curtain. Too many curtains in this room." As he looked round, he suddenly saw for the first time the effigy in the window, and stood staring and pointing, too amazed for words. "Tut! It's only a dummy," said the Count. "A fake, is it? Well, strike me. Madame Tussaud ain't in it. It's the living spit of him, gown and all. But them curtains, Count." "Oh, confound the curtains. We are wasting our time, and there is none too much. He can lag us over this stone." "The deuce he can. But he'll let us slip if we only tell him where the swag is." "What? Give it up? Give up 100,000 quid?" "It's one or the other." Merton scratched his short-cropped pate. "He's alone in there. Let's do him in. If his light were out, we should have nothing to fear." The Count shook his head. "He is armed and ready. If we shot him, we could hardly get away in a place like this. Besides, it's likely enough that the police know whatever evidence he has got. Hello! What was that?" There was a vague sound which seemed to come from the window. Both men sprang round, but all was quiet. Save for the one strange figure seated in the chair, the room was certainly empty. "Something in the street," said Merton. "Now look here, Governor. You've got the brains. Surely you can think a way out of it. If slugging is no use, then it's up to you." "I've fooled better men than he," the Count answered. "The stone is here in my secret pocket. I take no chances leaving it about. It can be out of England tonight and cut into 4 pieces in Amsterdam before Sunday." "He knows nothing of Van Sedder." "I thought Van Sedar was going next week." "He was. But now he must get off by the next boat. One or other of us must slip round with the stone to Lime Street and tell him." "But the false bottom ain't ready." "Well, he must take it as it is and chance it. There's not a moment to lose." Again, with the sense of danger which becomes an instinct with the sportsman, he paused and looked hard at the window. Yes, it was surely from the street that the faint sound had come. "As to Holmes," he continued, "we can fool him easily enough. You see, the damned fool won't arrest us if he can get the stone. Well, we'll promise him the stone. We'll put him on the wrong track about it, and before he finds that it is the wrong track it will be in Holland, and we out of the country." "That sounds good to me," cried Sam Merton with a grin. "You go on and tell the Dutchman to get a move on him. I'll see this sucker and fill him up with a bogus confession. I'll tell him that the stone is in Liverpool. Confound that whining music, it gets on my nerves. By the time he finds it isn't in Liverpool, it will be in quarters, and we on the blue water. Come back here, out of a line with that keyhole. Here is the stone. I wonder you dare carry it. Where could I have it safer? If we could take it out of Whitehall, someone else could surely take it out of my lodgings. Have a look at it." Count Silvius cast a somewhat unflattering glance at his associate and disregarded the unwashed hand which was extended towards him. "What? Dad, you think I'm going to snatch it off you? See here, mister. I'm getting a bit tired of your ways." Well, no offense, Sam. We can't afford to quarrel. Come over to the window if you want to see the beauty properly. Now, hold it to the light. Here. Thank you. With a single spring, Holmes had leapt from the dummy's chair and had grasped the precious jewel. He held it now in one hand, while his other pointed a revolver at the Count's head. The two villains staggered back in utter amazement. Before they had recovered, Holmes had pressed the electric bell. "No violence, gentlemen, no violence, I beg of you. Consider the furniture. It must be very clear to you that your position is an impossible one. The police are waiting below." The Count's bewilderment overmastered his rage and fear. "But how the deuce—" he gasped. "Your surprise is very natural. You are not aware that a second door from my bedroom leads behind that curtain. I fancied that you must have heard me when I displaced the figure, but luck was on my side. It gave me a chance of listening to your racy conversation, which would have been painfully constrained had you been aware of my presence." The Count gave a gesture of resignation. "We give you best, Holmes. I believe you are the devil himself." "Not far from him, at any rate," Holmes answered with a polite smile. Sam Merton's slow intellect had only gradually appreciated the situation. Now, as the sound of heavy steps came from the stairs outside, he broke silence at last. "A fair cop," said he. "But I say, what about that bloomin' fiddle? I hear it yet." "Tut, tut!" Holmes answered. "You are perfectly right. Let it play. These modern gramophones are a remarkable invention." There was an inrush of police. The handcuffs clicked, and the criminals were led to the waiting cab. Watson lingered with Holmes, congratulating him upon this fresh leaf added to his laurels. Once more their conversation was interrupted by the imperturbable Billy with his card tray. "Lord Cantlemere, sir." "Show him up, Billy. This is the eminent peer who represents the very highest interests," said Holmes. "He is an excellent and loyal person, but rather of the old regime. Shall we make him unbend? Dare we venture upon a slight liberty? He knows, we may conjecture, nothing of what has occurred." The door opened to admit a thin, austere figure with a hatchet face and drooping mid-Victorian whiskers of a glossy blackness, which hardly corresponded with the rounded shoulders and feeble gait. Holmes advanced affably and shook an unresponsive hand. "How do you do, Lord Cantlemere? It is chilly for the time of year, but rather warm indoors. May I take your overcoat?" "No, I thank you. I will not take it off." Holmes laid his hand insistently upon the sleeve. "Allow me. My friend Dr. Watson would assure you that these changes of temperature are most insidious." His lordship shook himself free with some impatience. "I'm quite comfortable, sir. I have no need to stay. I have simply looked in to know how your self-appointed task was progressing. It is difficult, very difficult. I feared that you would find it so—" There was a distinct sneer in the old courtier's words and manner. "Every man finds his limitations, Mr. Holmes, but at least it cures us of the weakness of self-satisfaction. Yes, sir, I've been much perplexed, no doubt. Especially upon one point. Possibly you could help me upon it? You apply for my advice rather late in the day. I thought that you had your own all-sufficient methods. Still, I am ready to help you. You see, Lord Cantlemere, we can no doubt frame a case against the actual thieves. When you have caught them. Exactly, but the question is, how shall we proceed against the receiver? Is this not rather premature? It is as well to have our plans ready. Now, what would you regard as final evidence against the receiver? The actual possession of the stone. You would arrest him upon that? Most undoubtedly. Holmes seldom laughed, but he got as near it as his old friend Watson could remember. In that case, my dear sir, I shall be under the painful necessity of advising your arrest. Lord Cantlemere was very angry. Some of the ancient fires flickered up into his sallow cheeks. You take a great liberty, Mr. Holmes. In 50 years of official life, I cannot recall such a case. I'm a busy man, sir, engaged upon important affairs, and I have no time or taste for foolish jokes. I may tell you frankly, sir, that I have never been a believer in your powers, and that I have always been of the opinion that the matter was far safer in the hands of the regular police force. Your conduct confirms all my conclusions. I have the honour, sir, to wish you good evening. Holmes had swiftly changed his position and was between the pier and the door. "One moment, sir," said he. "To actually go off with the Mazarin stone would be a more serious offence than to be found in temporary possession of it." "Sir, this is intolerable. Let me pass." "Put your hand in the right-hand pocket of your overcoat." "What do you mean, sir?" Come, do what I ask." An instant later the amazed peer was standing, blinking and stammering, with the great yellow stone on his shaking palm. What? How is this, Mr. Holmes?" "Too bad, Lord Cantlemere, too bad," cried Holmes. "My old friend here will tell you that I have an impish habit of practical joking, also that I can never resist a dramatic situation. I took the liberty, the very great liberty, I admit, of putting the stone into your pocket at the beginning of our interview." The old peer stared from the stone to the smiling face before him. "Sir, I am bewildered, but yes, it is indeed the Mazarin stone. We are greatly your debtors, Mr. Holmes. Your sense of humour may, as you admit, be somewhat perverted, and its exhibition remarkably untimely, but at least I withdraw any reflection I have made upon your amazing professional powers. But how—" Chapter 4. The Adventure of the Three Gables. I don't think that any of my adventures with Mr. Sherlock Holmes opened quite so abruptly or so dramatically as that which I associate with the Three Gables. I had not seen Holmes for some days, and had no idea of the new channel into which his activities had been directed. He was in a chatty mood that morning, however, and had just settled me into the well-worn, low armchair on one side of the fire, while he had curled down with his pipe in his mouth upon the opposite chair when our visitor arrived. If I had said that a mad bull had arrived, it would give a clearer impression of what occurred. The door had flown open, and a huge Negro had burst into the room. He would have been a comic figure if he had not been terrific, for he was dressed in a very loud grey check suit with a flowing, salmon-coloured tie. His broad face and flattened nose were thrust forward, as his sullen, dark eyes, with a smouldering gleam of malice in them, turned from one of us to the other. "Which of you gentlemen is Massa Holmes?" he asked. Holmes raised his pipe with a languid smile. "Oh, it's you, is it?" said our visitor, coming with an unpleasant, stealthy step round the angle of the table. "See here, Massa Holmes, you keep your hands out of other folks' business. Leave folks to manage their own affairs. Got that, Massa Holmes?" "Keep on talking," said Holmes. "It's fine." "Oh, it's fine, is it?" growled the savage. "It won't be so damn fine if I have to trim you up a bit. I've handled your kind before now, and they didn't look fine when I was through with them. Look at that, Massa Holmes." He swung a huge knotted lump of a fist under my friend's nose. Holmes examined it closely with an air of great interest. "Were you born so?" he asked, "or did it come by degrees? It may have been the icy coolness of my friend, or it may have been the slight clatter which I made as I picked up the poker. In any case, our visitor's manner became less flamboyant. "Well, I've given you fair warning," said he. "I've a friend that's interested out Harrow way. You know what I'm meaning? And he don't intend to have no button in by you. Got that? You ain't the law, and I ain't the law either, and if you come in, I'll be on hand also. Don't you forget it." "I've wanted to meet you for some time," said Holmes. "I won't ask you to sit down, for I don't like the smell of you, but aren't you Steve Dixie, the bruiser?" "That's my name, Massa Holmes, and you'll get put through it for sure if you give me any lip." "It is certainly the last thing you need," said Holmes, staring at our visitor's hideous mouth. "But it was the killing of young Perkins outside the Holborn bar." "What? You're not going?" The Negro had sprung back, and his face was leaden. "I won't listen to no such talk," said he. "What have I to do with this 'ere Perkins, Massa Holmes? I was training at the Bull Ring in Birmingham when this boy done get into trouble." "Yes, you'll tell the magistrate about it, Steve," said Holmes. "I've been watching you and Barney Stockdale." "So help me the Lord. Massa Holmes, that's enough. Get out of it. I'll pick you up when I want you." "Good morning, Massa Holmes. I hope there ain't no hard feelings about this 'ere visit." "There will be, unless you tell me who sent you." "Why, there ain't no secret about that, Massa Holmes. It was that same gentleman that you have just done mention." "And who set him onto it?" "S'elp me, I don't know, Massa Holmes. He just say, 'Steve, you go see Mr. Holmes and tell him his life ain't safe if he go down Harrow Way.' That's the whole truth." Without waiting for any further questioning, our visitor bolted out of the room almost as precipitately as he had entered. Holmes knocked out the ashes of his pipe with a quiet chuckle. "I am glad you were not forced to break his woolly head, Watson. I observed your manoeuvres with the poker, but he is really rather a harmless fellow, a great muscular, foolish, blustering baby, and easily cowed, as you have seen. He is one of the Spencer John gang, and has taken part in some dirty work of late, which I may clear up when I have time. His immediate principal, Barney, is a more astute person. They specialize in assaults, intimidation, and the like. What I want to know is who is at the back of them on this particular occasion." "But why do they want to intimidate you?" "It is this Harrow Weald case. It decides me to look into the matter, for if it is worth anyone's while to take so much trouble, there must be something in it." "But what is it?" "I was going to tell you when we had this comic interlude. Here is Mrs. Maberly's note. If you care to come with me, we will wire her and go out at once. Dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I read, I have had a succession of strange incidents occur to me in connection with this house, and I should much value your advice. You would find me at home any time tomorrow? The house is within a short walk of the Weald station. I believe that my late husband, Mortimer Maberly, was one of your early clients. Yours faithfully, Mary Maberly. The address was The Three Gables, Harrow Weald. So that's that, said Holmes. And now if you can spare the time, Watson, we will get upon our way. A short railway journey and a shorter drive brought us to the house, a brick and timber villa standing in its own acre of undeveloped grassland. 3 small projections above the upper windows made a feeble attempt to justify its name. Behind was a grove of melancholy, half-grown pines, and the whole aspect of the place was poor and depressing. Nonetheless, we found the house to be well furnished, and the lady who received us was a most engaging elderly person who bore every mark of refinement and culture. I remember your husband well, madam, said Holmes, though it is some years since he used my services in some trifling matter. No. Probably you would be more familiar with the name of my son Douglas. Holmes looked at her with great interest. Dear me, are you the mother of Douglas Maberly? I knew him slightly, but of course all London knew him. What a magnificent creature he was. Where is he now? Dead, Mr. Holmes, dead. He was attaché at Rome, and he died there of pneumonia last month. I am sorry. One could not connect death with such a man. I have never known anyone so vitally alive. He lived intensely, every fibre of him. Too intensely, Mr. Holmes. That was the ruin of him. You remember him as he was, debonair and splendid. You did not see the moody, morose, brooding creature into which he developed. His heart was broken. In a single month, I seemed to see my gallant boy turn into a worn-out, cynical man. A love affair? A woman? Or a fiend? Well, it was not to talk of my poor lad that I asked you to come, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson and I are at your service. There have been some very strange happenings. I have been in this house more than a year now, and as I wish to lead a retired life, I have seen little of my neighbours. 3 days ago I had a call from a man who said that he was a house agent. He said that this house would exactly suit a client of his, and that if I would part with it, money would be no object. It seemed to me very strange, as there are several empty houses on the market which appear to be equally eligible, but naturally I was interested in what he said. I therefore named a price which was £500 more than I gave. He at once closed with the offer, but added that his client desired to buy the furniture as well, and would I put a price upon it. Some of this furniture is from my old home, and it is, as you see, very good, so that I named a good round sum. To this also he at once agreed. I had always wanted to travel, and the bargain was so good a one that it really seemed that I should be my own mistress for the rest of my life. Yesterday the man arrived with the agreement all drawn out. Luckily I showed it to Mr. Sutro, my lawyer, who lives in Harrow. He said to me, "This is a very strange document. Are you aware that if you sign it, you could not legally take anything out of the house, not even your own private possessions?" When the man came again in the evening, I pointed this out, and I said that I meant only to sell the furniture. "No, no, everything," said he. "But my clothes, my jewels? Well, some concession might be made for your personal effects, but nothing shall go out of the house unchecked. My client is a very liberal man, but he has his fads and his own way of doing things. It is everything or nothing with him." "Then it must be nothing," said I. And there the matter was left. But the whole thing seemed to me to be so unusual that I thought— Here we had a very extraordinary interruption. Holmes raised his hand for silence. Then he strode across the room, flung open the door, and dragged in a great gaunt woman whom he had seized by the shoulder. She entered with ungainly struggles, like some huge, awkward chicken, torn squawking out of its coop. "Leave me alone! What are you a-doing of?" she screeched. "Why, Susan, what is this?" "Well, ma'am, I was coming in to ask if the visitors was staying for lunch, when this man jumped out at me." "I have been listening to her for the last 5 minutes, but did not wish to interrupt your most interesting narrative. Just a little wheezy, Susan, are you not? You breathe too heavily for that kind of work." Susan turned a sulky but amazed face upon her captor. "Who be you anyhow, and what right have you a-pulling me about like this?" "It was merely that I wished to ask a question in your presence. Did you, Mrs. Maberly, mention to anyone that you were going to write to me and consult me?" "No, Mr. Holmes, I did not. Who posted your letter?" "Susan did." "Exactly. Now, Susan, to whom was it that you wrote or sent a message to say that your mistress was asking advice from me?" "It's a lie. I sent no message." "Now, Susan, wheezy people may not live long, you know. It's a wicked thing to tell fibs. Whom did you tell?" "Susan," cried her mistress, "I believe you are a bad, treacherous woman. I remember now that I saw you speaking to someone over the hedge." "That was my own business," said the woman sullenly. "Suppose I tell you that it was Barney Stockdale to whom you spoke," said Holmes. "Well, if you know, what do you want to ask for?" I was not sure, but I know now. "Well, now, Susan, it will be worth £10 to you if you will tell me who is at the back of Barney." "Someone that could lay down £1,000 for every 10 you have in the world." "So, a rich man?" "No. You smiled. A rich woman. Now we have got so far, you may as well give the name and—" earn the tenner. I'll see you in hell first. Oh, Susan! Language! I am clearing out of here. I've had enough of you all. I'll send for my box tomorrow. She flounced for the door. Goodbye, Susan. Paregoric is the stuff. Now, he continued, turning suddenly from lively to severe when the door had closed behind the flushed and angry woman, this gang means business. Look how close they play the game. Your letter to me had the 10 p.m. postmark, and yet Susan passes the word to Barney. Barney has time to go to his employer and get instructions. He or she, I inclined to the latter from Susan's grin when she thought I had blundered, forms a plan. Black Steve is called in, and I am warned off by 11 o'clock next morning. That's quick work, you know. But what do they want? Yes, that's the question. Who had the house before you? A retired sea captain called Ferguson. Anything remarkable about him? Not that ever I heard of. I was wondering whether he could have buried something. Of course, when people bury treasure nowadays, they do it in the post office bank. But there are always some lunatics about. It would be a dull world without them. At first I thought of some buried valuable. But why, in that case, should they want your furniture? You don't happen to have a Raphael or a First Folio Shakespeare without knowing it. No, I don't think I have anything rarer than a Crown Derby tea set. That would hardly justify all this mystery. Besides, why should they not openly state what they want? If they covet your tea set, they can surely offer a price for it without buying you out, lock, stock, and barrel. No, as I read it, there is something which you do not know that you have, and which you would not give up if you did know. That is how I read it, said I. Dr. Watson agrees, so that settles it. Well, Mr. Holmes, what can it be? Let us see whether by this purely mental analysis we can get it to a finer point. You have been in this house a year. Nearly 2? All the better. During this long period, no one wants anything from you. Now suddenly, within 3 or 4 days, you have urgent demands. What would you gather from that? It can only mean, said I, that the object, whatever it may be, has only just come into the house. Settled once again, said Holmes. Now, Mrs. Maberly, has any object just arrived? No, I have bought nothing new this year. Indeed? That is very remarkable. Well, I think we had best let matters develop a little further until we have clearer data. Is that lawyer of yours a capable man? Mr. Sutro is most capable. Have you another maid? Or was the fair Susan, who has just banged your front door, alone? I have a young girl. Try and get Sutro to spend a night or 2 in the house. You might possibly want protection. Against whom? Who knows? The matter is certainly obscure. If I can't find what they are after, I must approach the matter from the other end, and try to get at the principal. Did this house agent man give any address? Simply his card and occupation, Haynes Johnson, auctioneer and valuer. I don't think we shall find him in the directory. Honest businessmen don't conceal their place of business. Well, you will let me know any fresh development. I have taken up your case, and you may rely upon it that I shall see it through. As we passed through the hall, Holmes's eyes, which missed nothing, lighted upon several trunks and cases which were piled in the corner. The labels shone out upon them. Milano, Lucerne. These are from Italy. They are poor Douglas's things. You have not unpacked them? How long have you had them? They arrived last week. But you said, why, surely this might be the missing link. How do we know that there is not something of value there? There could not possibly be, Mr. Holmes. Poor Douglas had only his pay and a small annuity. What could he have of value? Holmes was lost in thought. Delay no longer, Mrs. Maberly, he said at last. Have these things taken upstairs to your bedroom. Examine them as soon as possible and see what they contain. I will come tomorrow and hear your report." It was quite evident that the Three Gables was under very close surveillance, for as we came round the high hedge at the end of the lane, there was the Negro prize-fighter standing in the shadow. We came on him quite suddenly, and a grim and menacing figure he looked in that lonely place. Holmes clapped his hand to his pocket. "Looking for your gun, Massa Holmes?" "No, for my scent bottle, Steve." "You are funny, Massa Holmes, ain't you?" "It won't be funny for you, Steve, if I get after you. I gave you fair warning this morning." "Well, Massa Holmes, I done gone. Think over what you said, and I don't want no more talk about that affair of Massa Perkins. Suppose I can help you, Massa Holmes, I will." "Well then, tell me who is behind you on this job." "So help me the Lord, Massa Holmes, I told you the truth before." "I don't know. My boss Barney gives me orders, and that's all." "Well, just bear in mind, Steve, that the lady in that house and everything under that roof is under my protection. Don't you forget it." "All right, Massa Holmes. I'll remember." "I've got him thoroughly frightened for his own skin, Watson," Holmes remarked as we walked on. "I think he would double-cross his employer if he knew who he was. It was lucky I had some knowledge of the Spencer John crowd, and that Steve was one of them. Now, Watson, this is a case for Langdale Pike, and I am going to see him now. When I get back, I may be clearer in the matter." I saw no more of Holmes during the day, but I could well imagine how he spent it, for Langdale Pike was his human book of reference upon all matters of social scandal. This strange, languid creature spent his waking hours in the bow window of a St. James's Street club, and was the receiving station, as well as the transmitter, for all the gossip of the metropolis. He made, it was said, a 4-figure income by the paragraphs which he contributed every week to the garbage papers which cater for an inquisitive public. If ever, far down in the turbid depths of London life, there was some strange swirl or eddy, it was marked with automatic exactness by this human dial upon the surface. Holmes discreetly helped Langdale to knowledge, and on occasion was helped in turn. When I met my friend in his room early next morning, I was conscious from his bearing that all was well, but nonetheless a most unpleasant surprise was awaiting us. It took the shape of the following telegram: "Please come out at once. Client's house burgled in the night. Police in possession. Sutro." Holmes whistled. "The drama has come to a crisis, and quicker than I had expected. There is a great driving power at the back of this business, Watson, which does not surprise me after what I have heard. This Sutro, of course, is her lawyer. I made a mistake, I fear, in not asking you to spend the night on guard. This fellow has clearly proved a broken reed. Well, there is nothing for it but another journey to Harrow Weald." We found the Three Gables a very different establishment to the orderly household of the previous day. A small group of idlers had assembled at the garden gate, while a couple of constables were examining the windows and the geranium beds. Within, we met a grey old gentleman, who introduced himself as the lawyer, together with a bustling, rubicund inspector, who greeted Holmes as an old friend. "Well, Mr. Holmes, no chance for you in this case, I'm afraid. Just a common, ordinary burglary, and well within the capacity of the poor old police. No experts need apply." "I am sure the case is in very good hands," said Holmes. "Merely a common burglary, you say?" "Quite so. We know pretty well who the men are and where to find them. It is that gang of Barney Stockdale, with the big nigger in it. They've been seen about here." "Excellent. What did they get?" "Well, they don't seem to have got much. Mrs. Maberly was chloroformed, and the house was— Ah, here is the lady herself." Our friend of yesterday, looking very pale and ill, had entered the room, leaning upon a little maid-servant. "You gave me good advice, Mr. Holmes," said she, smiling ruefully. "Alas, I did not take it. I did not wish to trouble Mr. Sutro, and so I was unprotected. I only heard of it this morning, the lawyer explained. Mr. Holmes advised me to have some friend in the house. I neglected his advice, and I have paid for it. You look wretchedly ill, said Holmes. Perhaps you are hardly equal to telling me what occurred. It is all here, said the inspector, tapping a bulky notebook. Still, if the lady is not too exhausted. There is really so little to tell. I have no doubt that wicked Susan had planned an entrance for them. They must have known the house to an inch. I was conscious for a moment of the chloroform rag, which was thrust over my mouth, but I have no notion how long I may have been senseless. When I woke, one man was at the bedside, and another was rising with a bundle in his hand from among my son's baggage, which was partially opened and littered over the floor. Before he could get away, I sprang up and seized him. You took a big risk, said the inspector. I clung to him, but he shook me off, and the other may have struck me, for I can remember no more. Mary the maid heard the noise and began screaming out of the window. That brought the police, but the rascals had got away. What did they take? Well, I don't think there is anything of value missing. I'm sure there was nothing in my son's trunks. Did the men leave no clue? There was one sheet of paper which I may have torn from the man that I grasped. It was lying all crumpled on the floor. It is in my son's handwriting. Which means that it is not of much use, said the inspector. Now, if it had been in the burglar's— Exactly, said Holmes. What rugged common sense! Nonetheless, I should be curious to see it. The inspector drew a folded sheet of foolscap from his pocket-book. I never pass anything, however trifling, said he with some pomposity. That is my advice to you, Mr. Holmes. In 25 years' experience, I have learned my lesson. There is always the chance of finger marks or something. Holmes inspected the sheet of paper. What do you make of it, Inspector? Seems to be the end of some queer novel, so far as I can see. It may certainly prove to be the end of a queer tale, said Holmes. You have noticed the number on the top of the page. It is 245. Where are the odd 244 pages? Well, I suppose the burglars got those. Much good may it do them. It seems a queer thing to break into a house in order to steal such papers as that. Does it suggest anything to you, Inspector? Yes, sir. It suggests that in their hurry, the rascals just grabbed at what came first to hand. I wish them joy of what they got. Why should they go to my son's things? Asked Mrs. Maberly. Well, they found nothing valuable downstairs, so they tried their luck upstairs. That is how I read it. What do you make of it, Mr. Holmes? I must think it over, Inspector. Come to the window, Watson. Then, as we stood together, he read over the fragment of paper. It began in the middle of a sentence and ran like this. Face bled considerably from the cuts and blows, but it was nothing to the bleeding of his heart as he saw that lovely face, the face for which he had been prepared to sacrifice his very life, looking out at his agony and humiliation. She smiled. Yes, by heaven. She smiled like the heartless fiend she was as he looked up at her. It was at that moment that love died and hate was born. Man must live for something. If it is not for your embrace, my lady, then it shall surely be for your undoing and my complete revenge. Queer grammar, said Holmes with a smile, as he handed the paper back to the inspector. Did you notice how the he suddenly changed to my? The writer was so carried away by his own story that he imagined himself at the supreme moment to be the hero. It seemed mighty poor stuff, said the inspector, as he replaced it in his book. What? Are you off, Mr. Holmes? I don't think there is anything more for me to do now that the case is in such capable hands. By the way, Mrs. Maberly, did you say you wish to travel? It has always been my dream, Mr. Holmes. Where would you like to go? Cairo, Madeira, the Riviera? Oh, if I had the money, I would go round the world. Quite so. Round the world. Well, good morning. I may drop you a line in the evening. As we passed the window, I caught a glimpse of the inspector's smile and shake of the head. These clever fellows have always a touch of madness. That was what I read in the inspector's smile. Now, Watson, we are at the last lap of our little journey, said Holmes, when we were back in the roar of central London once more. I think we had best clear the matter up at once, and it would be well that you should come with me, for it is safer to have a witness when you're dealing with such a lady as Isadora Klein. We had taken a cab and were speeding to some address in Grosvenor Square. Holmes had been sunk in thought, but he roused himself suddenly. By the way, Watson, I suppose you see it all clearly? No, I can't say that I do. I only gather that we are going to see the lady who is behind all this mischief. Exactly. But does the name Isadora Klein convey nothing to you? She was, of course, the celebrated beauty. There was never a woman to touch her. She is pure Spanish, the real blood of the masterful conquistadors, and her people have been leaders in Pernambuco for generations. She married the aged German sugar king, Klein, and presently found herself the richest, as well as the most lovely widow upon earth. Then there was an interval of adventure when she pleased her own tastes. She had several lovers, and Douglas Maberly, one of the most striking men in London, was one of them. It was by all accounts more than an adventure with him. He was not a society butterfly, but a strong, proud man who gave and expected all. But she is the belle dame sans merci of fiction. When her caprice is satisfied, the matter is ended, and if the other party in the matter can't take her word for it, she knows how to bring it home to him. Then that was his own story. Ah! You are piecing it together now. I hear that she is about to marry the young Duke of Lomond, who might almost be her son. His Grace's ma might overlook the age, but a big scandal would be a different matter, so it is imperative. Ah, here we are. It was one of the finest corner houses of the West End. A machine-like footman took up our cards and returned with word that the lady was not at home. Then we shall wait until she is, said Holmes cheerfully. The machine broke down. Not at home means not at home to you, said the footman. Good, Holmes answered. That means that we shall not have to wait. Kindly give this note to your mistress. He scribbled 3 or 4 words upon a sheet of his notebook, folded it and handed it to the man. What did you say, Holmes? I asked. I simply wrote, shall it be the police then? I think that should pass us in. It did, with amazing celerity. A minute later, we were in an Arabian Nights drawing-room, vast and wonderful in a half-gloom, picked out with an occasional pink electric light. The lady had come, I felt, to that time of life when even the proudest beauty finds the half-light more welcome. She rose from a settee as we entered, tall, queenly, a perfect figure, a lovely mask-like face with 2 wonderful Spanish eyes which looked murder at us both. What is this intrusion and this insulting message? She asked, holding up the slip of paper. I need not explain, madame. I have too much respect for your intelligence to do so, though I confess that intelligence has been surprisingly at fault of late. How so, sir? By supposing that your hired bullies could frighten me from my work. Surely no man would take up my profession if it were not that danger attracts him. It was you, then, who forced me to examine the case of young Maberly. I have no idea what you are talking about. What have I to do with hired bullies? Holmes turned away wearily. Yes, I have underrated your intelligence. Well, good afternoon. Stop. Where are you going? To Scotland Yard. We had not got halfway to the door before she had overtaken us and was holding his arm. She had turned in a moment from steel to velvet. Come and sit down, gentlemen. Let us talk this matter over. I feel that I may be frank with you, Mr. Holmes. You have the feelings of a gentleman. How quick a woman's instinct is to find it out. I will treat you as a friend. I cannot promise to reciprocate, madame. I am not the law, but I represent justice so far as my feeble powers go. I am ready to listen, and then I will tell you how I will act. No doubt it was foolish of me to threaten a brave man like yourself. What was really foolish, madame, is that you have placed yourself in the power of a band of rascals who may blackmail or give you away. No, no, I am not so simple. Since I have promised to be frank, I may say that no one, save Barney Stockdale and Susan, his wife, have the least idea who their employer is. As to them, well, it is not the first. She smiled and nodded with a charming, coquettish intimacy. I see. You've tested them before. They are good hounds who run silent. Such hounds have a way sooner or later of biting the hand that feeds them. They will be arrested for this burglary. The police are already after them. They will take what comes to them. That is what they are paid for. I shall not appear in the matter. Unless I bring you into it. No, no, you would not. You are a gentleman. It is a woman's secret. In the first place, you must give back this manuscript. She broke into a ripple of laughter and walked to the fireplace. There was a calcined mass, which she broke up with the poker. Shall I give this back? She asked. So roguish and exquisite did she look as she stood before us with a challenging smile that I felt of all Holmes's criminals, this was the one whom he would find it hardest to face. However, he was immune from sentiment. That seals your fate, he said coldly. You are very prompt in your actions, madame, but you have overdone it on this occasion. She threw the poker down with a clatter. How hard you are, she cried. May I tell you the whole story? I fancy I could tell it to you. But you must look at it with my eyes, Mr. Holmes. You must realize it from the point of view of a woman who sees all her life's ambition about to be ruined at the last moment. Is such a woman to be blamed if she protects herself? The original sin was yours. Yes, yes, I admit it. He was a dear boy, Douglas, but it so chanced that he could not fit into my plans. He wanted marriage, Mr. Holmes, with a penniless commoner. Nothing less would serve him. Then he became pertinacious. Because I had given, he seemed to think that I still must give, and to him only. It was intolerable. At last, I had to make him realize it. By hiring ruffians to beat him under your own window. You do indeed seem to know everything. Well, it is true. Barney and the boys drove him away and were, I admit, a little rough in doing so. But what did he do then? Could I have believed that a gentleman would do such an act? He wrote a book in which he described his own story. I, of course, was the wolf, he the lamb. It was all there, under different names, of course. But who in all London would have failed to recognize it? What do you say to that, Mr. Holmes? Well, he was within his rights. It was as if the air of Italy had got into his blood and brought with it the old, cruel Italian spirit. He wrote to me and sent me a copy of his book that I might have the torture of anticipation. There were 2 copies, he said, one for me, one for his publisher. How did you know the publishers had not reached him? I knew who his publisher was. It is not his only novel, you know. I found out that he had not heard from Italy. Then came Douglas's sudden death. So long as that other manuscript was in the world, there was no safety for me. Of course, it must be among his effects, and these would be returned to his mother. I set the gang at work. One of them got into the house as servant. I wanted to do the thing honestly. I really and truly did. I was ready to buy the house and everything in it. I offered any price she cared to ask. I only tried the other way when everything else had failed. Now, Mr. Holmes, granting that I was too hard on Douglas, and God knows I'm sorry for it, What else could I do with my whole future at stake? Sherlock Holmes shrugged his shoulders. Well, well, said he, I suppose I shall have to compound a felony as usual. How much does it cost to go round the world in first-class style? The lady stared in amazement. Could it be done on £5,000? Well, I should think so indeed. Very good. I think you will sign me a cheque for that, and I will see that it comes to Mrs. Maberly. You owe her a little change of air. Meantime, lady, he wagged a cautionary forefinger, have a care, have a care. You can't play with edged tools forever without cutting those dainty hands.